right one. That's the right one.
Here?
Yep.
Thank you. Put all this stuff in front of me.
The live stream has started.
Thank you.
But there's a big test over there.
All right, good evening. Thanks for coming. See a couple new faces. Tonight we're going to talk about the charter amendments. We have a presentation for both these and also the parks bond. Our intent here tonight is not to advocate one way or another. It's just to showcase the facts and talk a little bit about how it's going to show up on the ballot. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the charter amendments. And I put a little slide on what is the charter, so in case you don't know. Just kind of a definition of municipal charter is you space a document. It's kind of comparable to the Constitution of the United States. So it's the most important legal document that the city has. It's common to look at your charter every 10 years. Not that we had a problem. There was a lot of things that we could have cleaned up. And so the charter consists of basically 7 articles. Those are your list of your articles. It's incorporation, your form of government. Talks about the village council's role, village administration role, the municipal powers, taxation, initiative and referendum, and then just some miscellaneous provisions. The process that the council went through, starting August 12th, they established a charter review committee. And then on March 22nd of 2022, those recommendations came back to council. And then on July 14th, through the second reading of these, the council did vote to put these on for the ballot for the citizens to vote on. So the process is from August 31st, the original kickoff meeting, to July 14th. It was 11 meetings, 2 or 3 hours each meeting. And so it was a pretty lengthy process. This isn't where just, we had a group of people got together for one night and decided we're going to make some charter things. I mean, it was a very lengthy process. We have some members, and I know there's some members here, and so I just want to recognize them for the work that they put in. Kimberly Kraft is our vice chair. She's a 5-year resident, a realtor. David Hudson, which I know is here too, 37-year resident. He's a retired mechanical engineer. Marcia Nielsen, 37-year resident. She's retired, but she does, I won't even say retired because she's a very asset to the village. She works with our historian group, party of 2, that helps us keep records of the village. So she's not retired. She still volunteers for the village. Dr. Gary Vonk, he was a 1-year resident. He has since moved. He's the president of Kaiser University. And then our chair, which was elected by that group, is Abby Brennan, a 27-year resident, consultant, former mayor, and council member. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby, who was part of that group, and she led that. She was part of the chair. I know we have some other chair members here that, when we get to the end, we'll ask them, you guys can ask some questions, and they can help answer those. I also like to mention Lori McWilliams was part of that group. She was here every night, our village clerk, and Mr. Keith Davis was here, I think, almost every evening too. And so, thank them for their time and all the board members. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Brennan.
Thank you. Hello to all of you. It seems a little strange to be back here and up here especially. I have been gone for several years now, I think, and but I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to be talking about this because the Charter Review Committee, or the board I should say, as Jeremy had said, worked really, really hard and came down to just these 5 items, but it's important to understand why, and we were very fortunate, especially Marcia Nielsen. I have to give a shout out to her as well. She actually has been to more meetings in Village Hall than council members have. She's always there. She is amazing, and so she put a lot of this together, and I thought that I'd like to go through that. So let's talk about the first recommendation, and that is to change the terms that we currently have now are 2-year terms to 3-year terms. And doing that, we actually would add a term limit, which we don't have term limits now, and some people look at it in two different ways, but a lot of people say, you know what, let's be sure that people term out so that people that want to run are not necessarily running against an incumbent, which can often feel a little more daunting than being able to come out into an open field and say, okay, you know, now I want to run. So we looked at it that way as well. One thing that we do here is a mayor is not elected as mayor. A mayor is appointed by his or her fellow council members. So all 5 are elected as council members, and then every single year we have what is called a reorganization. And in the reorganization, the council every year will say, okay, I would like to see Marcia Nielsen be the mayor this year. And somebody else will say yes, so yes or no, and then do the vice mayor the same way. But what it does is that levels our playing field as well, because the mayor has no more power or no less power than anyone. We're all 5 council members seated up here. That's how this works. So our recommendation, there's several things that are behind it, and Marcia did, I think, a very good job of, and I'm going to read some of your report here, Marcia, which I thought, the increasing to the 3 years has several different connotations. The first is, and I said this jokingly, but when you're first on the council, the first year you're still looking around to see where exactly the bathroom is. I mean, literally, it takes that long to come up to speed. So you get into office, you get yourself up to speed, then you have a year, and now you're running again. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It also incurs more expense to the taxpayers because every year when you have an election, there is a cost associated with it. So in a 3-year term, you would be able to have 2 elections within the 3 years, and then 1 year there wouldn't be an election. So that's one of the reasons for the 3-year terms. The other one is that, again, I think you will become better at your job. This is how I feel about this, and the board agreed. You get better at your job. You don't want to be here for 20 years. That's why the term limits come into play. But you do get better as you go forward. And if you don't have to be running for a re-election every couple of years, it makes some sense. That's what was part of our reasoning in this. The term limits, obvious to a lot of people. They just feel often that you're just sitting there and never get up and never leave. I think what the board agreed to do, we first recommended 2 3-year terms for a total of 6 years. The board came back, or the council came back and said, no, we think for making sure that there is good continuity, that perhaps 3 3-year terms for a total of 9 years would be the max that you could actually serve. You would then have to come out for an entire 3 years before you could run again. So there was a little confusion in the paper where the paper was saying you only needed to be out 1 year. That is incorrect. You need to be out 1 3-year term. So giving other people in the community the ability to not have to run against someone who's been here forever, they get to do it that way. So that was really what those are about. Also, the reorganization we felt was important that we do that every year, regardless of if it's an election year. We would still, every single year, the council would be seated, and every single year, a new mayor or the same mayor, a new vice mayor or the same vice mayor, they would be chosen every single year. So you're not saying, okay, well, this guy, he gets to stay in for 2 years. No, it doesn't work that way. So let's talk about that. Do you have any questions on this, or is there any concerns or thoughts that you might have for us? Because we've got our whole team here and they can all talk. Any thoughts at all? All right, well, that's good so far. So question 2, this is about 1 year of residency, and I think this is just kind of for lack of a better term, a no-brainer. You would want to have somebody come into your community that has been here for at least a year, living there continuously, so that they have a sense of who they are, what Tequesta is about, where you want to see it going. You're just not moving into a community and running for office. So this was something that we thought was important as well. I don't think that there's a lot to that, but are there any thoughts or questions about that?
I have one question.
Yes.
How do you determine the one-year residency?
Well, that would be, Lori, you can explain that. Lori's our clerk and she knows all things like that.
We would use, probably our water bills to make that determination, or, the voter registration list.
So when you get your driver's
Yeah.
license?
So we would-
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? All right, let's go on to, let me find it next, hopefully number 3 here. And this is a little different. And when you have a runoff, let's say that you have a situation where there is a runoff and now you have 2 people having to go back again, it didn't seem to make sense to go back to the polls when you already know where you are. It just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. I may not be doing this as well as I should, so jump in at any time, Keith. You're over there if you want to, as far as the runoff is concerned. Why don't you just explain that a little better? Keith is our attorney. Can you do that? Are you allowed?
Sure.
Thank you.
So this charter amendment proposal addresses a situation, a very rare situation, where you might have a tie at the end of the regular election. The charter requires the village to conduct a runoff election and basically, in that case, try again. The proposed amendment would resolve a tie vote by drawing lots. And believe it or not, there is state law that actually provides for the drawing of lots for tie votes at higher levels of election candidacy. So this is not something that the committee just came up with on their own. There's actually statutory precedent for using this process. As Ms. Brennan said, the cost of a runoff election is significant, and this is a proposed way to resolve a tie vote on the rare occasion when it happens in a much more cost-effective and still fair way. So that's really what it's about, and that's why the committee suggested it as a proposed amendment to the village charter.
Questions? Yes.
Does
Mr.
anyone
Bradford.
really know what the actual definition of drawing of lots means? I have no idea, is why I'm asking.
Names in a hat?
There's many ways. You could do the
Straw.
pick the short straw, pick the.
Flip a coin.
We did high card in Texas. We did high card in Texas, so it came in there, you flip the card over, whoever got high card.
You can gamble.
Yeah.
No way.
Blackjack.
The city of Mount Dora, if I could jump in here.
Yes.
The city there had a tie election several years back, and they have this wording. And so what they did was they put the 2 candidates' names in envelopes, separate envelopes. They stuck the envelopes in the bag, and the clerk pulled one of the envelopes, and the name that they pulled was the one that took office.
Do you have a better name for it?
No,
Mr.
my
Bradford?
only reference to it is in the Bible, the Roman guards. Drew lots. when
Oh, drew
Jesus
lots
was on
for
the
the
cross. I have no idea what that meant.
All right.
Yeah,
Right. I'm sorry.
Just
Of course.
going over my notes from the charter, there are 18 to 20 states that have this in their statutes. And so it is not without precedent. And the other thing is when you have a runoff, say you have a tie vote and it's, the election's in March, then by the time that the supervisor gets together with the clerk and they come up with a special election, you've lost 2 or 3 months where that seat is vacant.
And it's also additional money to run a second election. Because when we run our March elections, we're running with probably, well, there's 39 cities in Palm Beach County. I would say anywhere between 20 to 22 have an election in March, so we're sharing that cost of an election, where if we have a runoff, we're paying for that full cost.
I have one question.
Yes.
What is the percentage of voters that actually vote out of the 6,000 people that live here?
Between 15 and 19%. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, then, so any other thoughts or questions on this topic? All right, the next one is our recommendation number 4. This has to do with vacancies and temporary appointments. And let me read, of course, this amendment would empower the council to fill a vacancy until the next general election, which would either be in March or November. So it's essentially, instead of having another election, having a time that you say, okay, well, we have a vacancy now. What do we do with this? Well, in the past, depending on if it were 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, there were different ways to do it. But the same thing occurs in that if you have to have a special election, Lori, what are we talking, $50,000, $45,000 of taxpayer dollars, when in fact what you could do is appoint, the council could say, okay, let's appoint someone. Now again, there's 4 of them at this point, let's say. The 5th one's gone. You still have to get people to agree on the person that they want to appoint for that period. Now, even though our elections may only be one every 2 years or every 3 years, if there is a general election in November, for instance, which is not our election cycle, it would still then, that person that has been selected to fill the position for this time period would have to run for the seat. So it's not like saying, okay, this person's going to be in for the next 3 years. That's not the way it's going to work, or 2 years. Essentially, what occurs is when the council appoints, the very next election that comes up, this person will have to run, and a regular election would occur at a time when there is an election in the country, in the state, in the county. That's essentially how that would work. And again, instead of having to go through the whole process of an election, having to work with the supervisors of election on when they can do it, when they can't do it, this is just a temporary situation where you're filling a seat temporarily until a regular election can occur. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that?
The most anyone would be sitting would be a year.
Correct. Right. All right, so let's go on to number 5, and this is one of those that's near and dear to my heart, because every now and again people will suggest that maybe we should go with the county fire, county fire, or the sheriff's department. And when the fire department, for instance, was founded, it was an election of the people that did it, that said, you know, we don't want to be part of the county at this time, or we don't want to be part of a private fire service. The Village of Tequesta people wanted our own fire department. The police came along in a different way, but still, what we felt, the board, we felt that if any time there was a motion in any way to dissolve our existing structure of police and fire, or fire, they are completely separate, that it should go to the people. This should not be something that a sitting council can make that big of a decision. We're talking, you know, people that live in Tequesta, one of the things you hear about all the time is our public safety. And you don't get, the county is wonderful, the sheriff's department is wonderful, but you don't get the same service that you do when you're sitting literally across this campus over here, when your fire and your police department is within 3 or 4 minutes of you at all times. So that was something we felt was important, that the people, it goes back to the people. Somebody says, yep, let's do this. Council says, yeah, let's take this back to the people. Let the people decide. Is it okay with you to have the sheriff, or do you want your own police department? Is it okay to have fire rescue here in Tequesta, or do you want to have the services of the county, who would probably take over the same station? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that they're not Tequesta. They're not ours. And so we felt it was important to go back to the people, if that ever occurs. Any thoughts on that? Nope. Okay. Finally, the last is all the attorney's problem. Throughout the charter, over the years, there have been changes in grammar. There have been changes in various aspects. Sometimes they don't correlate directly with another document. And what Keith did was go through the entire document and go through to do what we call housekeeping, which is essentially, let's just get rid of the duplications, let's make the language correct, let's make sure everything is ticking and tying. So that really is, would that be correct? Did I say that correctly, Keith? Or
You did, and honestly, the biggest motivator behind this, as Jeremy indicated in his initial comments, one of the current articles in the charter is miscellaneous. So when you put something in a miscellaneous section, it just gets lost, unless you're intimately familiar with the document. So my goal was to take everything out of that miscellaneous article and actually put it into places in the document where, in the appropriate article, so where it belonged based on its subject matter. So that really was, for me, the biggest motivation behind this recommendation. And then, the committee had other recommendations, the map, and then some of the non-substantive language consistency tweaks. But that was, for me, the most important thing, was to get rid of that miscellaneous article and relocate those to other
Right.
places in the document.
yeah. Yeah, so like I said, that's all on Keith over here. He had to go through and do all of that. Are there any other thoughts or questions or anything charter related or anything you want to talk about? Okay, well, my job is over, I think. Yes, okay, thank you.
Now you're officially sunsetted.
That's right, the committee is sunsetted.
So the second part of what will be on the ballot for the voters to do is the bond referendum. And it started, I would say, it kind of originated from something similar to what Jupiter does. Jupiter has done this 2 times now. They had a $17 million bond that they bought like 60 acres of land with a bond, and then they just reissued that bond not too long ago, I think the last couple of years ago. And then I think Mr. D'Ambra brought it up. I think Mr. Stone has talked about this as well as possible, to get more open space within the village. And so what we have in front of us is a bond referendum to go to the people. And so we'll kind of go through the language that's on there. This is kind of the legal question. I think there's a copy of it if you guys want to take it, but the village will issue bonds in phases from time to time, not exceeding a total of $10 million, maturing within 20 years of issuance dates, with interest not to exceed the maximum legal rate payable from ad valorem property taxes levying the amount sufficient to pay debt service on such bonds to finance acquisition of environmentally sensitive waterfront, recreational lands, or lands of open spaces, archaeological, historic preservation, traffic mitigation, and recreational capital improvements. So I'm going to break all that down because that's just a mouthful. There's basically 2 facets of this, There's acquisition of land, and there's capital improvements. So as part of this, where it's desirable and it's best interest of the village to acquire lands that are environmentally sensitive or waterfront, or which may be used for recreation, open spaces, archaeological, historic preservation, or traffic mitigation. To make recreation capital improvements thereof in order to promote, improve, maintain, and protect health, safety, and welfare of the residents in the village. So the first part is acquisition of, to acquire lands, and so it's based in two categories. Lands that would meet the criteria in the bond would be environmentally sensitive or waterfront, or recreation, open spaces, archaeological, historic preservation, traffic mitigation. The council is working on a parkland purchase policy that will make sure it meets one of those criteria in order to purchase the land. So that is in the works. I think it'll be coming in March. So it'd be good timing with it. The second part of it, which is in bold, I won't read the whole thing over again, but to make recreation capital improvements thereof, collectively land acquisition program in order to promote, improve, maintain, and protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the village. So if the village owns a piece of land, parkland, either through acquisition or what we currently have, the village council can decide to use it for, use part of this money for capital improvements, such as, I know one that's a hot topic, and I'm not speaking for council, but Remembrance Park and upgrading Remembrance Park and make it a park. And so that is a possibility. And whether the council does that, that's still be determined if the bond passes. And so this just talks about it cannot be used for maintenance, and so it should not be an ongoing expense. You shouldn't use it to, have personnel that upkeeps it. It's kind of a one-time expense for it. Talk about, so who decides where the money goes? This is led by, through feedback from the citizens, the village council will decide where to best utilize these funds. There is a process to use it, so it can't be a single council member, can't be the village manager that goes out and says, oh, it's a great piece of land, let me go buy that. There is a process, kind of laid out the process. There is a legal requirement, so the village parkland acquisition operates legal framework drawn from multiple federal, state, and local sources. Generally, the village council is vested with the authority to acquire land or interest in land, whether within or outside the village's territorial borders. The authority is found within the village charter 5.01. And just so I can cite my source, that's Keith's language, not mine. So he can't have the legal requirements. But there is a process that is part of the parkland purchase policy. But it's also part of the state law and what we'd have to follow in order to purchase land. So I've laid out the steps. The steps are pretty concrete. How long it takes may vary, but step one, you got to have a willing partner, so the village can go out and see there's a piece of land that's available. We can go out and ask the owner if they're willing to sell it, and and kind of explain to them the process and what we're doing it. Or the owner could come to the village and say, I got a great piece of property for you. From there, the village council is asked to approve proceeding with an appraisal of the property. It is a requirement. We must get an appraisal of the property in order to go through with the purchase of a property. Step three, so you're talking right now, you're talking 1 to 6 weeks, depending on how quick we can turn around, getting a quote for appraisal and getting that to council. Step three, which is 6 to 10 weeks, which is actually getting the appraisal. And there may be some other criteria, like so we may need to get an engineering study to see if it's, make sure there's no issues with soil or any surrounding areas, but that would be that 6 to 10 week process where we're doing the appraisal and getting anything else we need in order to make an informed decision. So step 4, 1 to 3 weeks, the council is asked to approve an offer of compensation based on the appraisal. So there you go again, the council is making a second decision as a whole, the council is. Step 5, you're looking at another week. So as soon as the council approves that compensation-based appraisal, then the village representative will be provided that appraisal and presents the offer to the owner. And so from that point on, in step 6, depending on how long it takes, if the owner just jumps in there and says, that's a great offer, we'll take it, it could be quick, but your step 6 is typically 4 to 8 weeks. You're negotiating a price based on that appraisal and what the council has given the authority to the representative to negotiate. And then step 7 is the purchase agreement is forwarded to council. So now you're 3 times in front of council for the approval. So then you have the escrow proceeds until clear title is vested, taxes are prorated and canceled as of the date close of the escrow. So, Florida statutes, the no Florida statute does provide for procedure municipality in purchasing land, which keeps negotiation of the contract price exempt from public records. That allows us to negotiate a price without that price being public and somebody trying to undercut us in that process. But that's Florida statute 166.045 governs that. It basically talks about having to have 2 appraisals, depending on if it's over 500,000, you know, 2 appraisals, and then taking the average price of the 2. I mean, there's some language in there that probably only Keith could probably understand, but there is a process for that if the governing body wants to keep those appraisals close to the chest. There also is Florida statute 253.025, which agreed if it it exceeds a certain price, you have to take the average appraised price of the 2 appraisals, and so there would have to be an extraordinary vote. What's an extraordinary vote, Keith? 4, or is that unanimous?
For a council of 5, that would be 4.
4 votes. So if it comes above the average price of the 2 appraisals, the council with a 4-to-1 vote would have to approve that sale. So there is a process that governs this whole purchase. It isn't on a whim we're going to go out and just grab a property and start purchasing. There is a process that I guess secures your tax dollars, make sure it's used in an appropriate way. How the bond works? So we're issued $10 million, or we're not issuing $10 million. We're approving $10 million. But if you only spend $1 million, there's a nice, we go spend it on Remembrance Park, for an example, as a capital improvement. The taxes only start for that $1 million. It does not start for the whole $10 million until we issue debt for that $10 million. So, and I have some examples of that here in a second. And so it's issued as an aggregate total principal amount not exceeding $10 million, shall bear the interest rate and not to excess the maximum lawful rate, and shall be secured by and payable from the ad valorem taxes. So there's a couple different borrowing scenarios that we have available to us. Upon the referendum passing, the village can issue debt. However, we have to go through that process, or a process with our capital improvement plan on how we're going to spend that. And so council would have to approve us issuing debt through that process. The village has 3 years to expend the money from the time that they issue debt. So you can't take $10 million to go issue it and then go put it in a savings account and draw interest on it. It's called arbitrage. So you have to spend the money once you issue debt in order to do that. Not the $10 million at the referendum, the part that we're actually going to issue a debt. Once it's issued, the 20-year clock begins. So if we issue $2 million today, and then we got 20 years to pay that $2 million off. If at year 10 we issue another $2 million, then we have 20 years to pay that $2 million off. So it's from the time you issue debt, you have 20-year clock starts. As long as number 2 is calculated into the equation. So there are 2 scenarios here, which is the bond issuance, typically higher closing costs, lower interest rates, and the village would make twice yearly payments. Scenario 2 is the bank loans, lower closing costs, higher interest rates, and monthly payments. Depending on what the value of those interest rates are at the time when we get ready to issue debts, that would be the scenarios that we would choose from. Just a couple examples. What does that mean to you as the average homeowner? If it's a $10 million, and this is the first set, $10 million. We're looking at interest rates of 4.13 for a treasury note, 5.25 for bond rate. The average homeowner would be paying $276 a year for average home $500,000. And then you have your scenario with $5 million, that equates to $138. And if it was just $1 million, it equates to $28 a year. So those are some scenarios that helps relate it to your own situation. I think that's it. I mean, I kind of flew through it. Is there questions, thoughts? We got a finance director, we got a legal team. We're more than happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Jeremy, would you just clarify back under capital improvements, when you're talking about, in order to promote, improve, maintain, and protect, is this only with the acquired lands? It's not like to come out and fix the street in front of Village Hall, is this
Yes.
capital improvement goes along with the land acquisition.
That's right. So not land acquisition, so if village recreational properties.
Any
So,
other.
so like we talked about before, let me give you two things where it calls that out. I think it was in the question. Recreational capital improvements, so it had to be a rec capital improvement, and we could use it for any of the parks or land that the village has, that meets that criteria, that has to be a recreation capital use. Does that answer it? I tried, there's two examples. So the example I gave before was, Constitution Park, Village Green, those would be recreational use if the council chose to use it for capital on those properties, or land that we purchased, it would have to be a recreational use. Yes, ma'am.
But it can be used on land that we don't own, like DeCosta Park.
Yeah,
Okay.
Even though it's state-owned.
yeah, yes, it's a recreational use, we could use it for this purpose. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Who decides where the money goes? Through feedback from the citizens, the village council will decide. What is the process of feedback, reaching out to the community within the village?
Well, I think our council, I would say that our council does a pretty good job of reaching out. I mean, through different avenues. Each council member got their own ways of reaching out to citizens. We have, public meetings that people can come to. When we're having a discussion on that, we post it all. We do a good job of doing that. So if there was something the council would be considering, there's lots of opportunities to participate. But typically, council members, and I hope this stays true for as long as I'm here, they reach out to the citizens that they have contact with and get their feedback.
Have you, one more, just follow up. Community preservation funds have been utilized all around the country, and I have a bit of knowledge. Has the village thought about utilizing that route?
We have not tackled community preservation funds. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, it's when, within a village, which we own property in up north, when you sell your property, you know automatically that 2.5% of that sale is going into the CP fund. And that way, the fund builds up, and when a piece of property comes up, whether it's an old potato field that the village wants to keep, or, a recreation area, the money is in the pot, and there's no borrowing necessary. You just know, when you sell your property, there's gonna be an additional tax that goes into the community.
Interesting. I haven't heard that concept before, but sounds something to look into for the village. Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I just told her that concept is not allowed by Florida law.
Oh, okay.
So just-
I don't think it's allowed, in my experience, in two other cities that I work in Texas.
I
don't
guess
think
it's
that
a New
was-
York law.
Lots of people from New York come up with it. So how did the village finance its new recreation center?
A bank loan.
A bank loan. So why didn't you use a bank loan for purchase of land?
We can.
But why are we not?
Why are we not now?
Yeah.
Because we have to pay it back. So we have to have a revenue.
So why, so are you
So
saying,
wise.
is the village saying by default that a bond issue is better than the bank loan option?
No, we gave both options under this scenario.
Actually, there's three options. You didn't do the revenue bond. You did a bank loan, a GO, but not revenue bond. And a revenue bond is the same as virtually scenario number one, except that people don't vote on it. It's simply done, and the village pays for it through its ad valorem taxing powers.
No, not through the ad valorem taxing powers, through the revenue.
Well,
bond.
through the back door,
Well,
non-ad
it's
valorem,
non-ad valorem.
through non-ad valorem.
And there's other important issues and things that we're trying to fund, for instance, the roads and utilities and those
question I had was, why did you not use 30-year term instead of a 20? Why did you use a 20-year term instead of a 30-year term? To me, the logic of public debt, one of the issues with public, benefits of public debt is that the generation of taxpayers will pay that debt over time. So over 30 years, you would, of course, the annual payment would be less, but the percentage attributed to interest would be more, but the taxpayer would end up paying less per annum over 30 years than they would over 20 years.
Well, we modeled this program after Jupiter. That was how it was originated, and they did it 20 years, so we followed that suit. I mean, you know, we've had discussion with council, we took that route. Obviously, you know, if this doesn't pass and we ever look at this again, we can take the 30-year route. I mean, that's an option, but it was, you know, it was directed to staff to look at this program that Jupiter had, and that's how we developed it.
My last question, and I'll hush. I see there about traffic, is it the terminology traffic mitigation? So in the 1990s, when we did the landscaping that you see today on Country Club Drive, that was actually done for traffic calming purposes. Is that an example of what you mean by traffic mitigation?
Could be, yep. I think that was an example that could be used. We are also talking about, you know, if a road needed to be built or an extension to a road or something to mitigate traffic issues, we could do for that. So I think there's a couple scenarios that would fall into that category. But I think you'd have to be, you know, and you probably know this as well, if not better than me, you know, if you're talking about landscaping, make sure it really classifies traffic mitigation, and that road guy or slowing people down, having something to back that up, not just saying, oh, we're putting trees up here, that's traffic mitigation, making sure that it is traffic calming and it is doing those effects. So we have to be very careful with that to make sure that we cover those. Any other questions, thoughts? Is that a scratch, Rick, or is that a raised hand?
Oh, no, that was a scratch. It's got a haircut.
Well, if there's no other questions, I know we have a council member here. If you want to ask questions, a future council member, and Rick is here. You guys can ask them questions separately. I do want to thank our chair, our board, our charter review committee, Marcia and Abby, and I just want to thank you guys for coming. And you know, if there's any questions, if you guys go home and think of something else, feel free to reach out to us as staff. It's very hard for us with the new state statutes for us to reach out to you. And so if you have questions, please reach out to us. Let us help you understand it. We're not necessarily advocating one way or another. We want the people to decide on all these. And so